Welcome, welcome. Just thought I'd throw a tutorial here together on basically an intro to UV mapping. I created a couple of videos lately. One that showed a bit of a workflow between Blender and Unreal Engine. How can we permanently manipulate the pivot point of a static mesh in Blender so it is affected in Unreal. And then the other thing we covered was being able to apply several different materials to one static mesh. And I wanted to follow up on that video because it's not complete as is. And I'll kind of go through why that is and why UV mapping is important here. So first, I'll just bring up maybe the static mesh that we were working on in the last tutorial. If you are interested in any of the previous tutorials, I'll throw the links in the description below. But anyways, here's basically the static mesh that we went through and manipulated in Blender last time. You can see it's just basically what I was using it for is an exterior wall, and it has different materials mapped to different parts of the object. And if we were to drag and drop materials to any face of that object, they would update in real time. And now you could have brick on the outside of a wall and paint on the inside without the two interfering, which is great. The challenge with that, though, is that putting a material on individually on every side face of a static mesh could lead to optimization issues long term if you did that for every static mesh. Of course, you are going to have examples where you definitely need to do it this way. More so for when you're building, if you're using a similar static mesh throughout a level and you need the materials to be interchangeable, this method may be ideal. That being said, I'll show you the example of what we're going to build today with UV mapping. Just a really simple 3D stub wall here, and it's got multiple materials on it. Multiple textures on the different faces of the object. However, if you look and navigate to the static mesh, it's only got one material. So we're going to go into how do we do that and how's that done. So let's sort of dive into it. Before we go into the hands-on tutorial, I will just call out a few things because you will need some additional software outside of Unreal. So there's three pieces of software that you're going to need, and all of the software is free and open source. Anything that I put on my channel will go down that route. Everything will be free. Any of the assets I use will be free. I think that's really the beauty of where we are with this technology today, is that with Unreal opening their platform for essentially free, and then having these other really high-end modeling software tools available free, it really takes the handcuffs off of individuals, and you can create to your heart's content. So I think it's pretty cool. Anyway, so long story short, everything that I show will be free. I am going to dive into just a little bit more of a complex example before we go into the hands-on tutorial. And so I've got the model of this epic kid here, and I'm going to pick on him for a sec. If you don't have the asset available, that's okay. You can follow along with a different one, or you can just watch, and that's fine. You won't need to do any hands-on at this point. So anyways, why am I bringing this guy up? So if we look at the details of this character and look at the backpack shader material, just looking at this material, you can tell that there's different colors and different textures applied to this material. And this particular material is being used to gather the details of what's portrayed on the kid's shoes, what's portrayed on his backpack straps. What else does this material have? Is obviously his backpack and the detail on there, and it looks great. So how does that all work? How does this material go onto a 3D object and make it look the way that it looks? So let's double click on that material and let's sort of find out. I don't know why this blueprint is such a disaster. Maybe it imported that way, or maybe somebody was really lazy. I don't know. But we're not going to go into the material blueprints today. We'll save that for another day. But really all I'm looking for is this one sort of primary texture file. And really, just so you know how I sort of navigated around this is I'm just holding the right mouse button down and I'm just dragging my mouse around and it's just moving the screen. So anyways, all we need is this texture sample pack. All it's doing is it's using the texture file in here, and it's basically driving the base color of this material. That's all that's happening here. I'm going to click on that, and we really just want this texture for our purposes. So I'm going to hit this magnifying glass to force the content browser to bring that up. And you see it's got it selected in the content browser when I hit that magnifying glass. So I'm just going to double click on this texture and see what's there. So just looking at this, you can tell right away. It's just a flattened 2D image, and we're extracting information out of this 2D image and applying it to a 3D material. And that's really the magic and the science behind UV unwrapping and UV mapping, is essentially we're unwrapping a 3D object into a flat 2D file, and then we're mapping 2D images that we want to go back to those particular places on a 3D mesh. And don't worry if that's too much at this point. By the end of this tutorial, you'll get a better understanding of what's going on. So you can see in here in this 2D file, you've obviously got the kid's flattened out backpack, both sides of it. You've got what looks to be a backpack strap. You've got his shoes that have been flattened out, and you can kind of see the soles and different things in there. And you can kind of start to imagine and see, okay, I can kind of see what they've done here. So that's all I wanted to show you. This is a much more complex example than what we're going to do today, but I wanted to just highlight it and show its use cases and kind of really drive home. If you built this out the other way that I had showed you with, you'd need probably 20 or 30 different materials, and that's just going to overload a system if you did that with every single mesh. So this is the way that they're doing it to get it on one material with multiple textures. So a much more complex example, but maybe when you're exploring Unreal and you run into that, it won't feel so overwhelming or confusing because you've kind of seen an example already. Okay, so we're done with this. We're actually going to go up to File and create a new project and start the hands-on part of the tutorial here. So I'm just going to navigate to New Project. We can just pick a game, that's fine. We'll pick third person. All of these settings are fine. Just really make sure that it has starter content, because we're going to use the starter content for this. I am going to put this in as UV mapping demo. You can name yours whatever you want and navigate wherever you want it, and I'll just call it UV mapping. And then we'll just create a project. Okay, we don't need to save that. And then we'll just wait for Unreal to boot up here. Okay, so it's ready. So here's our default file. So I will say before getting into the hands-on part of the tutorial that you will need 3 pieces of software. You obviously will need Unreal Engine, and you'll need GIMP, and you will need Blender. And these are all free. So that's the beauty. Anything that I host on my channel, anything that I put on here will all be free. Free assets, free software. I'm not going to explore anything that costs money. I think that's one of the beauties of where we are today with this type of software, is that everything is free. Some high quality, high-end software is essentially free, and you can do whatever you want with your imagination. Your only limitation is your imagination and basically your hardware in your computer. So I think it's a really cool spot to be in. Anyways, with that being said, if you need Blender or GIMP, I'll put the links in the description below. I'll also put some links to the previous tutorials that I mentioned if you're interested in those in the description below. So have a look at those, get that software loaded, and then come back to this tutorial. Okay, so let's kick it off. So what I'm going to do is let's just first create our static mesh that we're going to use to project our textures on top of. So what I'll have you do is up in the top left under modes, and then brush editing, We'll click that. And then in place actors, your place actors may be up here in the top left. All I did is just to conserve space, I dragged that over to this section. I like it down here. And then we're going to go in place actors. We're going to click geometry, and then we're just going to drag in a standard box brush. And then what we want to do is convert this box brush into a static mesh. So in details, under brush settings, you should have this little, to me it looks like an eject icon, but I think it's just expanding the advanced options. Click that, and then you'll find this create static mesh button. Hit that, and then just name your static mesh whatever you want it to be. I just called it box test. So there we go. We've created this static mesh, and you can see it's just got one material applied, and that's perfect. That's what we want. So now now that we've created the static mesh, we want to find two materials that we can use to put on different sides of this object. So I'm just going to navigate over here and expand this little box here. Click on content, and I'm just going to search for grass. You can see if I dragged and dropped this grass on here now, this is the problem that we're trying to solve. If I throw grass on there, it just goes on every side, and I have no control over what side it goes on. So what we actually want to use is we want to use this texture file. If I double click on that, you can see this is just another flattened 2D file. And what I want to do is I want to right click on that texture file. I want to go to Asset Actions, and then I want to export. And we can just leave it as the default name. And just remember to put it somewhere where you're going to remember where it is, because we'll need it later. So we've set that file outside of Unreal, and then we want another texture to manipulate. I'm just going to use Perlin Noise because I know that it's a texture file that works. So I'm just going to double click on that, and you can see it's just another flattened, noisy sort of image there. Doesn't matter. We obviously wouldn't use this as a real life example, but we'll use it now. So we're going to right click on that texture file, we're going to Asset Actions, and then we're going to export. Same thing, gives you the option to export as a Targa or TGA file. That's the file that we can use interchangeably between GIMP, Unreal, and Blender, so we'll just leave it as is. I wouldn't suggest using JPEG or PNG or anything like that. Leave it as the TGA file, and all of these different pieces of software will be able to see it in the right format. Okay, so we've exported those two textures. We're going to apply those to different sides of this cube. And then the last thing that we need to do is we need to export this cube so that we can use it in Blender. So same thing, right click on your static mesh, go up to Asset Actions, Export, and I'm just going to leave it as box test and as an FBX. Save, and your default options are fine. So just hit export and you're done. So what we've done is we've basically sent two TGA texture files outside of Unreal for manipulation, and we've sent a 3D FBX file outside of Unreal. So we're done in Unreal for now. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna navigate over to GIMP. So fire GIMP up, and once it's open, you should have a screen that looks like this. And we're gonna go up to File, and we're gonna open up one of the texture maps that we just exported out of Unreal. So we're gonna go to Open, and then we're going to select the grass. Once you do that, the grass will be just sort of laid out in this system. So if you're not familiar with the software, just bear with me here quickly, because not everybody's at the same level. I'm just going to go over the layering concept, because what we want to do is we want to bring in our second file here, but we can't just open it because it'll just open that file and close this one down. What we actually want to do is we want to open that secondary file, the Perlin Noise that we had, and we want to layer it on top of this grass. And so if I was to make some sort of analogy, is if you were doing an art project in real life and you had two pieces of paper, layering is just taking one piece of paper and taking a second piece of paper and putting it over top of the first one. And you've essentially just created a layer of two pieces of paper. So if I was to expand that example a little bit further, if I had a blue piece of paper, I put a white piece of paper on top, and I had them lined up, and then let's just say I cut a perfect circle in the middle of that white piece of paper, and I threw away the scraps. And so now what you've got, if you looked down at that, you've got a white circle sitting on top of a blue piece of paper. And if you looked at it, you could, objectively say, hey, maybe that's a moon in a blue sky. But essentially what you've done with a layering technique is you've created a new image by using 2 layers. And that's the whole concept behind Adobe Photoshop and GIMP and some of these other 2D software tools. I shouldn't say that's the whole concept, but that's a major concept within these tools. So with that being said, I want you to go up to File, and then instead of Open, I want you to open as Layer, and then I want you to navigate to that Perlin noise file and open that up. And now we've done exactly what I've said. We've taken the grass, and then we've layered the Perlin noise image on top of it. To sort of demonstrate this further, if we go to the top left, you've got this little move tool. Make sure that's selected, and then with your left mouse button, you can click and drag and move the top layer around, and you can actually see they're 2 separate layers. So I'm going to let go of that, and I'm just going to hit Control-Z to undo what I've done and put the layers back to how they are. And the last thing I'm going to draw your attention to is over to the right, you can see you've got your 2 image files here, and this is layering them. So the grass is on the bottom, and the Perlin noise is on the top. If I clicked the grass and dragged and dropped it with my left mouse button up to the top, you can see I can move the layers around here as well. So I'm just going to put the grass back on the bottom. Okay, so select your Perlin noise layer, and then what I want you to do is I want you to go up to Layers, and I want you to go to, I believe it's Transform, no, Layer to Image Size, or Scale Layer actually is what we want. So Layer, I want you to go up to Layer, Scale Layer. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to make this Perlin noise about half the size. So right now it's 2048. I'm just going to make it 1024. And then I'm going to hit Scale. And what it's done is it's just obviously shrunk the top layer down to about half the size. And then with the left mouse button, and remember with your sort of move object here, I'm just going to drag and drop and sort of place this guy. It doesn't have to be perfect for this tutorial, just in the top corner. And so really what we've done is we've just now created a 2D texture object that has 2 different textures on that. And we're going to use this within Blender to then do our UV unwrapping and UV mapping. So we're done here. So all that I'm going to do is go up to File, and then with GIMP, you don't want to save, because all that does is it saves the project in its current state so that you can reopen it in GIMP. What you want to do is you want to export it, and export it as, and we're going to export it as a TGA file. So all that we're going to do is we're going to leave the extension the same way that it is, and we're just going to rename this. So I'm just going to call this grass underscore and noise. There you go, and we'll just save that. So grass and noise TGA, make sure it's saved in the same folder, and then we'll export it. It's going to come up with these standard settings are fine, and away we go. So we're done with GIMP. You can close out of GIMP. I'm not going to save any of the changes. I'm just going to discard them because we have our file. And then now we're going to open up Blender. So I'm just going to click on General. And what will happen is you'll get the default cube here. So we're just going to select that cube with our left mouse button, and we're going to hit X. And we're going to delete it. So click, then hit X, and then you're able to select delete of that object. And then we're actually going to import the FBX that we exported out of Unreal. So we're going to go up to File, we're going to hit Import, and we're going to import that FBX. So we're going to navigate to wherever you exported that FBX file. For me, it was in 2D files, and I just called it box test. The standard settings are fine, so just import it as is. And now you've got your box here in the middle of Blender. So what I want you to do first is I just want you to hit G, and what that does is it grabs the items that are selected, and then I want you to hit Z. And that'll allow us to move this box up on the plane, and I just want it above the green and red axes there, the Y and the X axis. And then you just left click and it stops. If you want to look around your block, you can hold the middle mouse button, click, and then with it held down, you can just move your mouse and you can navigate around the box. The other thing you can do is you can zoom in and out with your scroll wheel. And that's basically all we're going to need for Blender. The other thing that you can do is you can hold your shift button down, you can hold the middle mouse button, and then when you move your mouse, you can sort of just slide up and down. So those are the basic movements in Blender. That's all that we're going to need for this tutorial in this box. The next thing I want you to do is I want you to set up Blender for UV mapping. Up in the top middle, there's the shading tab, and I just want you to click that. And then what that'll do is it'll bring up 4 different windows that we're going to use for UV unwrapping and mapping. If you don't have the shading tab, just over on the plus there, under General, you should be able to find shading if by chance it's not in your tabs. What else can we do here? We also want to continue setting it up. So with your object selected, go up into object mode and hit edit mode. And then we'll leave that as is for now. And then we'll come down to the bottom left here and we'll start setting up this window. So with this little, I don't know what that is, image box with like a paint splotch on it, we're going to click that, and then we're going to click UV editor, and that'll sort of set up our UV editor window. I'm going to just navigate to the edge of that window till I get the sliding icon, and then I'm just going to click and hold, and I'm going to drag that out just to give us a little bit more space to work in. And then lastly, in this section, there's this little fly out option, and when I get my slider up, if I left click that, it'll just bring this up for different icons and items there. And then I think the next thing that we'll do is we'll drag in our 2D image file that we just created in GIMP. So I'm going to navigate to that folder, 2D, and I'm going to bring in this grass and noise 2D TGA file that we just made. I'm going to left click and just drag it, and we can bring it into our UV editor, and it just drags in there. Okay, is there anything else that we need to set up? Yes. The other thing that we'll want to do is we'll want to set up our material here, our material for our 3D image. So we've already got this selected. And what we want to do is we just want to navigate over to this pane on the right side, and there's a little materials properties section that we want to click. And that'll bring up our materials properties. If you saw the previous tutorial, then you saw me navigating here, and that's how we set up our materials. And we've got our standard grid material. That's those different gray boxes that are default in Unreal and many other places. We're just going to double click on this material, and we're going to rename it, and we're going to call it grass and noise, and we'll leave it as is. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to, with this material, grass and noise selected, we want to go down to our base color. And so again, referencing our previous tutorial, we were manipulating the color faces and the materials that were attached here with the base color. We're not going to do that today. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to go over to this little circle icon next to base color, and we're going to click that, and this brings up a menu to allow us to use something else instead of just a standard material. And what we're going to do is we're going to click image texture, because that's what we're going to apply to this material today. So we're going to hit image texture, and that brings up this other little window. So now in our base color, we've got image texture, and then we've got some options here. We're going to click on the image icon, and what we're going to do is we're going to browse to our grass and noise file. And it's actually should just be right there, grass and noise TGA, and you just select that. And now it's using that file and projecting it onto our base cube. And you can sort of navigate around your cube and look at that and see, okay, yeah, that's the file we created and it's projecting on there. But that's not how we want that to work. So the next thing I'll show you is up in the top here, next to edit mode, you've got these 3 little icons. The first one is for selecting vertices, and then you can select individual little vertices on your 3D object. The next one is for selecting edges. So if I click that one, I can now select full edges along my object. And the third one is faces, and that allows me to select the different faces of my objects, which are triangles right now. So if I click the faces and I shift click the face there, you'll actually notice that something's changing in your UV mapping window. So if I go back to the UV mapping window, just left click on it and scroll out, and then go back and click on the faces, you'll notice that for every triangle I click on, a similar triangle shows up in the UV editor. And really that's your mapping between the 2D image and your 3D image. So if I was to, for example, select 2 triangles on our cube here, and then go back to the UV editor, left click and drag and select that. I could then, left click and drag, select our image, and then I could grab. So you press G in Blender is always to grab. And now I can move around this 2D reference or this UV map on top of my 2D file here. So if I now left click and leave it, let's just see. You can see you'll be able to see me move this around in real time on the object. So you can actually see that image being moved around. If I was to hit S for sizing, it brings up these two little arrows, and then if I move my mouse up and down, I can now size this in real time, and you'll see that also reflect on the 3D image. So that's sort of the basics here. But I'm just going to actually just grab this, move it out of the way, because we don't want to use the standard mapping. I want to show you how to fully unwrap an object as is. Okay, so couple of principles that you want to think about when thinking about UV wrapping or mapping. With this cube, there's two ways that you can think about it. Is, if you picture this cube as a cardboard box, if you've ever had to break down cardboard and flatten it out into, for throwing it in the garbage or whatever, or cutting it or whatnot, that's sort of the idea here. Is if you picture this cube as a cardboard box, if you had to cut lines along the edges of the cube in order to make that one flat piece of material, how would you do that? The other principle that sometimes is used in UV wrapping or unwrapping is thinking of wrapping paper. Think of this cube as like a present, and if you put wrapping paper all around it, you've now basically got a 2D image sitting over top of a 3D shape. If you wanted to unwrap it without tearing the wrapping paper, you could cut some slits around the edges of the wrapping paper to unfold it all into one nice piece. And that's essentially the concept that we're going to do here with UV unwrapping. We need to figure out a way to take this 3D object and convert it into like a 2D wrapper. So how are we going to do that? Okay, let's dive into that a little bit. So up in edit mode, we're going to go and click edges, because what we're doing is we're going to create the edges that we want the system to cut along. So think of it, if we go along with the cardboard box analogy, we're basically picking the edges that we're going to use an X-Acto knife to cut and break the box down. So we've selected this little object up here for edges, and then we're going to start picking objects on our cube. So I'm just going to pick the first edge here, and then the bottom edge. All I'm doing is I'm hitting Shift and then left clicking to click multiple edges. And you can see I've basically just drawn a little U around our object. And actually, just to make this a little bit more clear, I'm going to go up to our baubles here, and I'm going to click the skeletal mesh bauble, and it'll just make it easier to see the edges that I'm clicking. So I've basically drawn, whoops, I clicked the wrong edge there. I've basically drawn a little U around the shape of this cube, and then I'm going to rotate this around, and I'm going to do the exact same thing on the alternative side. So I've basically got two U's on either side, and the last thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to click one edge in between them to connect them. And that's all that we need to do in order to unwrap a cube. What we want to do is, with those seams picked, we want to lock them in. So how we do that is we navigate up to this UV button here, and we click Mark Seam. So again, going along with the analogy, you see that now those seams that I've picked have turned sort of an orangey color. Those again are the X-Acto lines that we're going to use to cut down our cardboard box and break it out into a 2D image or into a flat 2D object. Okay, so with those seams marked now, and just make sure that you've done them correctly. You should have two U's, and then you should have one line sort of connecting the two of them together. We're going to go up to UV, and we're going to go up to unwrap. And this is going to basically create a new unwrap for us in here. Why did it not work? Clicked unwrap. Oh. Yeah, it's basically, okay, so it's done. It has done the, oh, I know why it didn't work. My bad, I forgot something. Okay, So right steps, but I just missed a step in between. So we marked the seams. We had those good, and then we went directly to unwrap. We actually need to select the object before we unwrap it completely. So with your edges still, one of your edges selected, you can hit L, and what that does is it selects all of the connecting vertices or edges with the edge that you select. The other way that we can do it is you can just click somewhere on your object and you can A for all. So A will select your entire 3D object, L will select all of the pieces that are connected to the portion of the 3D object that you selected. So either one will work. And then we'll go back to UV and we'll hit unwrap. Boom. And so that has now created our new wrapper. So you'll notice that when I click that, I don't know if you noticed, but you may have noticed that those huge triangles that were over here were the previous wrapping that was created for our object before. With our new unwrapping, it's actually gone and created this sort of flattened 2D box. And so this is where I can kind of explain why we chose the edges that we did. So if you look at the box sort of flattened out here, we cut along like I said, the U portion and this connecting piece to sort of make these flaps. So with the U cut out, we've basically created these two flaps on the side of the box. And with the flat section, we've cut along here to allow for this sort of T shape. If the concept isn't super clear to you on the computer, you might want to play with a cardboard box and just flatten it out, and then it may give you an aha moment of how this is working. But this essentially now is our flattened out 2D unwrapped box, and now it's sitting over top of the image. So this is where now we can start the mapping process. Now that we've done the unwrapping and we've flattened out the box, we can now start mapping the sides of our cubes to the images that we want to show. So to do that, we're going to go back to the top right and our baubles, and we're going to go back and select the viewport shading so that we can actually see this happen in real time. And now you should see our image projected. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go up to the face select next to edit mode, click that, and we're going to select two faces of the box. And so say this side of the box is one that you wanted to have the purlin noise on. With those selected, it's now showing the section of the 2D image that's being reflected on the box. So what we can do is we can select these in our UV editor, we can hit G, and we can actually move these to the section of the 2D image that you want to reflect on that part of the box. And now you can see that with that section selected, we now have purlin noise reflecting on one side of the image. And say we wanted the purlin noise to now reflect on the back side as well. We could just select those two faces, and then select and drag to select our items in the UV editor. We can hit G to grab, and we can also move this to a section to reflect that. You can have these overlapping. There's no issue with that. It's just, for obviously more complicated scenarios, you may want to have different textures showing and things like that. So it's just the flexibility. So I just chose to put it there. And now if we go back to our 3D image, you'll notice that on two different parts of our box, we've got purlin noise, and the rest we've got grass. So that's essentially it. We're basically done. I would just now click on our material, make sure that we hit assign so that that's been assigned to our grass and noise material, and we can now export this object back to Unreal. So I'm just going to navigate up to the top, follow the same export settings that we've done in the past. We're going to go up to File, Export, FBX. You got this window that pops up. I always just select the bottom three. They don't apply to our scenario, but I think, as I've said in the past, these are the three that you generally use. We don't need any of the other settings adjusted. We'll navigate to where our FBX is stored. Click that, export it, and you're essentially done in Blender now. And then lastly, we'll go back to Unreal. We will go to any section here, right click on an empty section, import to game, go and navigate to where we created that new FBX file. I think I called it box test. Open it up. Yeah, we can overwrite the asset, no big deal. What did I do there? Import box test. Open. Do you want to overwrite the existing asset? Yes to all. Box test. All right, let's just delete this then. Let's delete it out of our scene. Delete it out of our thing here because we don't need it anymore. Oh, you know what? I could have just re-imported it. I don't know why I didn't do that. Okay. Anyways, we'll import it here. We'll import that file, import all, and away you go. So now we've got this little box here that we've created in Blender, has different things on the side, different textures on the different sides. Comes with one material. You can see the material is constructed. You can see our material just goes into the base color there, and our 2D image is in there. So we've created all those things today, and that's really introductory level into UV mapping, unwrapping, and wrapping. That's it. So I hope that helped. If there's anything else that any questions you guys have or anything else that you want me to cover, let me know. But we'll try and keep this to a close here, and we'll shut her down. So thanks, everyone.